right. Hello. So I'm going to get right into it today. The exporting and rendering bit is what I'm going to show you now, just again, because I think that's something really important that you should know. And I'm going to use the example file that I gave you for the camera movements, and I'm going to show you the methods that you can use to actually export your video. So this is just so we can have some sort of video to export. So there are two different methods of exporting. So the one is the built-in render queue in After Effects, and then the other is a program called Adobe Media Encoder. So we'll start off with the built-in one. You can render individual comps just by making sure that they are the open active one. And under the menu for composition, you can say add to render queue. And it's a queue because you can have multiple comps that you can add to the list here. So you can have a project with like multiple different versions of things or different sizes or adverts or whatever, depending on your uses. So you can have them all queued up, and then you can say render and come back a couple hours later and have them all be lined up. So once you hit that add to render queue, it opens up the queue over here, and that's where you see that there is my comp, camera movements comp queued. And in there, we've got all the different settings that we'll adjust. By default, you want to make sure that your render settings are correct. So they're normally set as best settings. And most of the time, most of these things you want to have set on. You want to have your best quality and your full resolution. But you can lower the resolution to be something smaller if you want to just do like a preview render just to see that your timings and things are correct. And that is something that I would recommend you do, is just to do a preview render while you're doing your project, so you can just sort of see that the timing feels right and stuff like that. And also when you play back your animations on a full screen, you can feel things a little bit better than you would with just a little windowed thing. Just the way things move across the screen can sometimes just feel a little bit different, and maybe things will feel a little bit overwhelming on a full screen thing, or maybe a little bit too small or something. So I would recommend you just do some preview renders while you're doing your project, just to get a better feel, and you can play back full speed without having to, do all the previewing and preloading and stuff. And also then you can get an idea of when you're gonna finish your project, how long it will take to render out, and get an idea of how much to set aside before your deadline. So will it take you an hour? Will it take you more, or whatever? So in here, you can also adjust other settings like turning off things like motion blur. So you can turn that off for everything, things like that. So your render can go a little bit faster if you're doing a preview. But if you're doing your final thing, of course, you want to make sure that it is on for all the things that you want. The important thing that you must check here is that the time span is what you want. So at the moment, it is saying work area only. So if we go to the comp, the work area is this area selected over here, and that's all that will render. So if you have just been previewing a little section of your animation with the work area, and then you want to render out the whole thing, you might just end up with a half-second animation or something. So just check that under your settings over here that you have either the work area selected if that's what you want, or the entire comp if that's what you want. You can see the duration of what your rendered thing will be listed over there. Okay, so the next most important thing, well, it's actually even more important, is the output module over here. You see it's saying lossless. So lossless would mean that it's full resolution, high encoding, no file size reduction or anything like that. So this 22-second animation might come up to a few gigabytes, which is fine if you're doing something where you want to submit it for like TV or something and you want it to be the best possible thing. But usually you want to use a properly encoded thing, and they can still be high quality as well. So lossless is not something I would recommend. So don't just add to render queue and render, because your settings might just eat up all your hard drive space. So there's a little drop down where you can get some presets, but if you click on the lossless text, you can get the full options over here for all the different types and things. So at the moment it's saying AVI with no format options, so that's the lossless format. And if I click that drop down, we'll see all the different types of options of things that we can have. So all these ones with sequence will render out a sequence of images, so a PNG sequence or a JPEG sequence. So that's just every single frame as a image on your computer. So it'll create a folder with JPEG 0010020 whatever to however many hundred or thousands or whatever frames you have in your animation. So that won't be a video, that won't have sound, that'll just be the images. And you can also just export it out to be a MP3 or a WAV or an AIF. So those are audio files. So you can just export the audio of your project should you want that. So the video formats that you would have here are the QuickTime and the AVI format. So those are the only ones that you get in After Effects currently. They sort of moved all these out to Media Encoder. So generally I would usually use Media Encoder, but if you want to just do a quick thing, you can use QuickTime, and under format options, you can choose different presets over here. Animation is a pretty good high quality one. You get other ones here like ProRes, which you might want for a specific use. So in your briefings for things, you might get a listing of the format that it's got to be or something like that. If you want to just use the QuickTime, our animation should be fine. It's not a very small file format, but it's smaller than uncompressed and things like that. You do get other options here for things like adding the alpha channel or just exporting the alpha channel. So that will be the transparency. So if you want to have a video that you can overlay over something else, you would use that. And also be sure that your audio, if you have audio in your project, is turned on, and you can choose different formats in there as well. So then another thing that I want to stress is just make sure that you know where you're exporting your video to. So in this case, it's saying output to camera movements.mov. If I click on that, I can just choose exactly where it will export. So in this case, it'll be to the desktop. So I've already exported this one before, and that was 87 megabytes. So that's the animation format size. So instead of being a few gigabytes, that's 87 megabytes, which is okay. It's not tiny, but that's fine for a video this size. And then as soon as you want to actually start rendering your thing, there's a little render button. Render just means make it into a video in this case. You click render, and then it will start rendering your video, and you get a little preview of how far it is and what the frames look like. And if you want things to go a little bit faster, a little tip is to just turn on caps lock, and then it stops the preview. You see it's no longer updating, so it doesn't have to make that image twice, so it can render out a little bit faster sometimes, not always. You might get a few minutes in a long animation. So this would go a lot slower if I had all my depth of field and motion blur and stuff turned on. So don't think this is the normal speed of rendering. This is much simplified. So just remember that if things might take a lot longer than this. Okay, so then you get a little ding and your render is complete. So that took me 1 minute, 9 seconds to render a 22-second animation. So that's pretty quick. And my computer is not very new, so maybe it will be faster on some of your things. But as I said, you've only got the QuickTime and AVI formats in After Effects. If you want to do this a lot better with better file formats and more options and video encoding settings, then we would use the other option. So make sure you have your comp open and selected, and under composition menu, say add to Adobe Media Encoder queue. So Adobe Media Encoder is another program in the Creative Cloud that deals with exporting and re-encoding videos and stuff like that. So if I just open that up, we'll give it a couple of seconds and it should add that comp to the Media Encoder queue over here. So it's just like the queue in After Effects, you can list up a whole bunch of different comps in here to render out. There you go. So now it's come up over here. And in here we get different file formats. So by H.264, that's a very good encoding format. So if you don't know what to use, I would say use that. That'll make it a .mp4 file. So you get a whole lot of different options over here. You'll see most of these are different video formats, but you can also do like the image sequence, so like JPEG sequence and stuff. And also the next thing is just different presets. So here it's saying match source and high bitrate. So that's just using the source size and settings and stuff. So that'll be whatever size your comp is, and then high bitrate, but you get a whole lot of different presets for different things and sizes, so you can resize your video and use different settings over there. So I'm just going to click on the H.264 setting over here, and that'll open up all the settings that you can adjust for your videos. So it can take a little bit of a moment to load that all up, but then you'll get a nice little window where you can adjust all these different settings. So we've got a preview of our video over here, and we can scrub through the timeline over here and see what it looks like. And you can also adjust the length for the time. So you see it's saying work area, or you can say entire composition, or you can do a custom time or whatever. So you can see exactly and crop and do all that sort of stuff over here. And all your settings that you can adjust are on the right. So you can choose the format. So H.264 is the format in this case. You can do the AVI, you can do HEVC, which is H.265, which is even more advanced than the H.264, but not all programs support it. So your file sizes will be a lot smaller, but not all programs can open that up. And there are a lot of formats over here. If you really want to look these up, have fun. There are tons of them, but normally you'll get a specification for your thing. And if you don't have one, I would recommend H.264. So YouTube videos and stuff would work fine with this. So you can use the different presets over here, as I said, but they all just adjust these settings over here. Match source, as you can see, is saying locking all these things to the size of the comp. So if I turn off the check mark over here, I can resize the video to a different size. I'm just matching it, so you can change the frame rate and all that sort of stuff. And there are a lot of different settings you can change over here for how it encodes the video. If you've got a graphics card, you want to use hardware encoding because that'll be way faster. Software encoding will use your CPU instead of the graphics card. So not all these settings are available for all the different file formats, but the most important ones to check are near the bottom where it says bitrate settings. And this is basically the size of the video that you'll get at the end. So saying target bitrate in megabits per second. So at 10 megabits per second, that's sort of an okay setting. If you make that lower, your video quality might decrease. If you make that higher, your video quality might get better, but your file sizes will increase. And you'll see at the bottom over here, there's an estimated file size for how big your video will be. So my recommendation is somewhere between 8 and 12 for your videos. So if you don't know what to pick 10. And if you render your video and it looks blocky or noisy and stuff, maybe raise that up. If your video sizes are enormous and you can't send them over your internet connection to somebody that really needs it, maybe you want to lower that down. And then you have other things in here. So that was the video settings. Under audio, you can choose audio settings as well. So you can increase the bitrate or lower it depending on, if you want to make your audio sound shit. You can choose different audio formats and stuff like that as well. So there are other useful things in here. If you want to do like DVDs and stuff like that, there's captions that you can add. I'm not going to go into that. So you can do whole things, adding subtitles and captions and things like that. And under effects, you can do things like add color correction, lookup tables. You can add an image overlay. So you can add like your company logo onto your video using an image. And you can also, if you're doing like a preview render for a client and you don't want them to have the whole video without paying you, so you add your sort of like draft animation overlay on that so that they don't actually have a complete thing or something like that. You can add time codes and titles and stuff as well on this as well. Not always going to want to use those, but they're pretty cool if you have a use for them. Yeah, so those are the settings that you can look at. Just make sure that you do have video and audio turned on if you want them. You can turn off audio if you don't want audio and stuff like that to make your files smaller. And then just like the After Effects encoder, just make sure that you know where your output file is. If you don't remember where you did that, once you've rendered your thing, you can right-click and say, show me the output file. So that's pretty useful for that. And then you can just click on the green Start Queue button, and it will start rendering. And the nice thing about this with Media Encoder is you can render a thing and then still work in After Effects and do other things. Though your computer will be busy and slow and things might will just take a few seconds. I think in this case it's actually a little bit quicker because Media Encoder doesn't have to run all the stuff that After Effects runs, so it's only going to take maybe a little bit quicker. Maybe it'll be about the same, I don't know. But this is using the H.264 file format. So if you remember, the other one was 87 megabytes or something, and I'll tell you now how big this one is. It'll be a lot smaller. Okay, so that is the rendering and exporting for your videos. I'm going to move on to some interesting stuff.